Franki Raffles Photography, Activism and Campaign Works was selected from over 40,000 images from really the mid-80s to the mid-90s, from 1984 to 1994. She was very driven by a sense of a progressive society. She was driven by equality, by justice. These are things she passionately believed in. What we're very proud of with this project is we feel that this is a very clear sense of a feminist photographer who is really presenting a very powerful feminist vision.
I was aware of Franki's work as a photographer because I'd known her, she'd been my friend. And then, kind of by accident, I was in charge of photography at Edinburgh Napier University. And I became aware that Franki wasn't even a footnote in the history of photography. People had reflected and written about zero tolerance and the impact that that campaign had had, but nowhere was Franki's achievement as a feminist photographer recorded. And I thought, this is wrong. And I remembered this book that Franki gave me when I was a history student, when we first were friends at St Andrews, hidden from history. And I thought, I don't want that to happen with her. She should be recognised and remembered. She shouldn't be one of those forgotten women. I discovered that Sandy, her partner, had carefully stored all of Franki's photographs in several different cupboards in the house that they'd shared together. About 10 years ago now, the work was all shifted from Sandy's cupboard to the photography archive at St Andrews. And this show has made it possible to look across that entire archive, to look across all the different work.
Most of her work was really focusing on gendered labour, so women at work, women's work in different ways. So the first section of the exhibition is very much looking at those different commissions. As you go into the second sort of section, we're really there focusing more on those broader themes of the advocacy, of the protest, of the activism that then in a way bring both of those together in the final works of Zero Tolerance. Franki graduated from St Andrews University and she moved up to the Outer Hebrides, to Lewis, and I think that was really where she picked the camera up, and that then became really what I would say is a tool of change for her. There was a consciousness.
At Lewis, she definitely started taking photographs with a clear purpose of what she was doing. She photographed the neighbours that she'd got to know. She was working herself as a handloom weaver within the Harris tweed industry, and she photographed other people at their looms, and she photographed women crofters cutting the peats and also with the sheep.
We've very specifically chosen 9 images which I think right from that start in Lewis embody everything she cared about. You can see from the very first image, in that image is a picture of a woman amongst her community doing her work, shearing the sheep with her child standing right beside her. And there's something in that, I think, in the essence of those very first few photographs where you can really see what she was interested in doing and exploring and making visible through this. The childcare, the family, the community, holding everything together and trying to earn a living.
All sorts of changes were happening as she moved away from Lewis, moved to Edinburgh. And once she'd established herself in Edinburgh, she really started to work as a freelance photographer.
When Franki really arrived in Edinburgh, she had this real sense of what she wanted to do with her own work and why she was using photography to really explore and look through particularly this economic lens of women and women's work and gendered labour.
It's interesting that at the height of Thatcherism, the mid-80s, Edinburgh had a Labour council, a local authority. It also had a women's committee, and they were dedicated to promoting the interests of local women. And Franki got involved. She'd already done some work with campaign organisations like Rape Crisis and Women's Aid, and she got involved with the Women's Committee and various projects that they were researching. And so she would photograph events that the Women's Committee organised, and then they came up with the idea of documenting what it was like for women working across the whole of the city.
There was an incredible friendship and working relationship developed between particularly one of the women's unit officers, Evelyn Gillan, and Franki Raffles. So Evelyn was very much understood that systemic internal approach to working within a council, to looking at the services that were offered to women, be that through training, through leisure, through childcare, through housing. All of those things were looked at through the lens of women in the city. And Franki worked to then make visible and create these images that in a sense responded to that context.
And they would go and interview women about what their jobs were and also take photographs with them at work. And the title, To Let You Understand, came out of the fact that in the interviews they realised lots of women would use that phrase, to let you understand the reason that I work at night is because I don't have to pay for the childcare. So to let you understand was really came out of the voice of the women that she was photographing.
She didn't make the To Let You Understand exhibition to be seen in one of the galleries. She showed that work in swimming pools and community centres. And when she got this grant to go to the USSR and take these series of works, those photographs on those boards were literally put in the back of the car. And they headed off, her and her daughter, Anna.
It was 1989, it was still the Soviet system. Franki negotiated with various authorities and got permission to travel through the Soviet Union, and she established a link with a photographic club in Rostov-on-Don.
And in Rostov-on-Don, she presented the images as an exhibition to the community and the women there. And of course then the outcome of this was she also then brought the images of the USSR women and the Soviet women back and shared a discussion with the women of Edinburgh. So this constant kind of connecting women. And she had a really passionate belief that really what united women across a sense of a solidarity across borders. In a way, I think there's a direct connection between how she positioned women's voices in her work, wanting their voice to be heard, which is very similar to her motivation and thinking about protest and people having agency in their voice to make a change. A deep believer in the democratic process.
After Franki had been in the Soviet Union in 1989, the system collapsed in the early years of the 1990s, and she became aware of the displacement, particularly of Jewish women who had been displaced from various Soviet republics and had emigrated to Israel.
Franki was Jewish. It was important to her. Ethnicity was important to her as a youngster. She'd travelled not just to Moscow as a child through connections to her own roots and her own family history, but also had spent time on kibbutz when she was younger and had visited Israel. So really the project was very much looking at, and she did a series of interviews with women who had been displaced from the USSR. You can see these women have let her into their homes. They're really opening up. And we're showing this piece of work, Lot's Wife, for the first time ever. It's never been shown in public. And to some extent, it was unfinished. I wouldn't say unresolved, because I think there's 10 portraits with 10 texts and 10 very carefully selected images. She was very happy with the results of that work. She was just playing around the format of how they would be presented.
So Zero Tolerance was a really ambitious project that came out of the Women's Committee and came out of the collaboration and partnership between Evelyn and Franki.
They commissioned research into getting a greater understanding of the attitudes of young boys, young men who are still within the school system within Edinburgh. So they carried out this research and were so shocked by what came back, and that it was much worse than they thought, and that there was very clear issues that they felt needed to be challenged, that then led to the development of the Zero Tolerance campaign.
And then they decided on having a very strong campaign using these tableau photographs of women with the stark facts from the research that they'd undertaken.
And Franki's role within that was around the design, the creation of the tableau, the photographs, and then the juxtaposition of the text, the language, and the imagery.
And they were so ambitious for having it on buses, on bus shelters, on across Princes Street, all across Edinburgh. It had an enormous impact.
I think it is the only feminist campaign I know of that was run in the public realm by a public body. So it had a very clear sense of what it was there to do and what it was there to address.
Having seen it in Edinburgh, lots of local authorities followed suit, and it was copied and adopted in other places. And having seen that success, Franki and Evelyn set up the Zero Tolerance charity, which still runs today.
Franki's work talks to that sense of thinking about different structures and systems of organising. There's a lot of practice that has been quite hidden because it was pre-digital. And I think there's something where we look back and understand the things that were valued, that were important, that sense of community, and we fast forward now and we look at what we've lost, what's been hollowed out. This is the right moment for this project because it speaks to so many of those concerns that we're hearing from our communities in this moment.